If you love road tripping, hiking, and driving your vehicle out to remote campsites, Utah is the state for you. Specifically, southern Utah is a hiker and overlander's dream. With 5 national parks, 6 national forests, and nearly 22.8 million acres of BLM land, approximately 65% of Utah consists of public lands that are managed by federal agencies. And if you include state managed lands, more than 70% of Utah is public land. Only 2 U.S. states have more public land than Utah does, and those are Alaska and Nevada. Alaska being 95.8% public lands and Nevada being 87.8%. For comparison's sake, only about 24% of my home state of Minnesota is public land. And while I love my home state of Minnesota, it is such a treat to be able to travel to places where there's just so much more land that is open for exploring. I loved my road trip up to Alaska last summer, and honestly, if you have the time to go that far, it's well worth the effort. But Utah is a little bit closer. In today's video, I'm going to focus on the southwestern region of Utah specifically, as that is where I spent the grand majority of my most recent road trip to Utah, hiking and camping and exploring. If you drive into Utah, you can approach from many different areas, but if you're going to be flying into Utah and renting a car, more than likely, if you're visiting the southwestern corner, you're either flying into Las Vegas or St. George, Utah. So I'm going to start with some hikes in the St. George area and work my way around a fun road trip driving loop that anyone could enjoy. The first hike on my list is the Quarry Trail. This trail is a fairly short trail, only about 2.2 miles round trip, and it is right in St. George, Utah. This is a hike that was only a few minutes drive from the hotel I stayed at while I was working for a couple of days in St. George. The Quarry Trail is a fun way to see a little bit of St. George, as it'll take you up and along the old quarry edges to get some beautiful views of the surrounding city. The quarry itself was created when they were building the temple in St. George, hence the name Quarry Trail. And so there's a lot of rocky outcropping that you're going to be walking along, and you can see the completed temple in the distance. But if you're like me, the trails in the city are fun, but you didn't come to Utah to stay on paved roads and hike where you can see houses. So that brings me to the second hike on this list, Yant Flats. Yant Flats is a fairly short drive outside of St. George, Utah, but the road getting up to it is a little questionable, so leave time to drive slow and get over the ruts. And if the weather is poor, aka it's been raining or it's muddy out, this might not be the road for you. When I drove my Toyota Tacoma up it, I had no problem, but there were definitely some spots where I was balancing on ridges to avoid going in deep ruts that others had created when the road was more soft. But all that driving to get up to Yant Flats trailhead was worth it. The trail starts with a short, roughly 1 mile hike through kind of a sandy, slightly forested area. The views headed out aren't anything too spectacular, although when you turn around and come back to your car, you do get some mountain views you'll see at the end of the hike. But Yant Flats itself is really neat. It's a wide open expanse of rock with beautiful views into the distance. Some of the trail descriptions I read compared it to the Wave in Arizona. I haven't personally been able to get a permit for the Wave yet, and so I can't make a direct comparison, but Glee and I definitely enjoyed wandering around at Yant Flats, and we got there a little early on a weekend day and had the place to ourselves. On the way back, we passed several other families coming out, and the parking lot was pretty full, so this can get busy on weekends. And another one of the benefits of driving all the way up to Yant Flats is that there is a lot of land that you can camp on up there. So the forest that you're driving through has several pull-offs, and Glee and I were able to snag a fantastic campsite all to ourselves. We had gorgeous views, couldn't see anyone else. You could hear some road noise as I was parked somewhat close to a cattle gate or a cattle grate. And you could hear the cars going over that when they drove past, but there wasn't a whole lot of traffic as it got to evening and nighttime, and so it was a lovely, peaceful spot to camp. Another trail just outside of St. George in Hurricane, Utah, which is a little closer to the entrance to Zion National Park, is Three Falls Trail. This trail is a fun trail that features 3 dry waterfalls. I guess there can occasionally be some water running, but mostly it's dry. If you want to go to all 3 of them, it does require some scrambling. I did not go to all of them. I just went to the first one, which was also enjoyable and was a really short hike. It's only a third of a mile from the trailhead, but we just stopped by this on my way to pick up a friend from the airport. So we didn't have time to go the whole way. But the second fall is only a half a mile from the trailhead, and the third fall is only 1.4 miles from the trailhead. So if you're up for a little bit of scrambling, it's a beautiful area, well worth stopping by. And the final trail I explored during my time in St. George, Utah on this trip was the Babylon Arch Trail. This was a really fun trail as it headed out through kind of like sandy, rocky area. And we walked all the way down to the river below the Babylon Arch. I missed the arch on the way out. So you might want to keep the GPS coordinates for the arch in your phone when you head out. Make sure that you don't miss the arch. It's not that big and it's a little bit hard to see from the top. But it was a beautiful hike. You can either park in the Sand Cove trailhead, and then it's about 2.2 miles round trip to the arch. Or if you have a vehicle that is capable of doing a little more 4x4 roads, you can go to the primitive camping area, and then it's only 1.5 miles round trip to the arch. I made it a lot longer by missing the arch, going down to the river and coming back up. But it was a beautiful area and well worth the time. Now, if you head north from St. George, Utah towards Bryce Canyon, there is a wonderful hike in Kanara, Utah. And yes, you may have heard of Kanara Falls, which is a very popular hike, requires a permit, and does not allow dogs. But close to that is another hike called Spring Creek Canyon. That is free and allows dogs. And so Glia and I stopped there, and the slot starts about a half a mile in. You can go for about 5 miles round trip if you go the whole way, but gorgeous, gorgeous canyon. Really fun to get into a slot canyon and have space to yourself, especially something that's so near such a popular trail. On this road trip, I drove up and around Bryce Canyon. Bryce Canyon is definitely worth a stop if you haven't been there before. I'd previously backpacked in Bryce Canyon, and I had visited once in February when everything was coated in snow, which was gorgeous. Dogs are not allowed on most of the hiking trails in Bryce Canyon, although they can do some of the rim trail and overlooks, which is wonderful. But since I'd already been there and I had Glia with me, we decided to move on to some more dog-friendly choices, and we hit up Red Canyon in Dixie National Forest, hiking the Bird's Eye Trail and getting some very gorgeous hoodoo views there as well. I was a little surprised that there was still some snow in this area as we were visiting in middle of April, but this is a little bit higher elevation, and the overnight low for our first night in this region was 16 degrees Fahrenheit. So just be aware, it's a little chillier up there. April might not be the warmest time of year to camp around Bryce Canyon and Red Canyon in Dixie National Forest. Continuing east, we stopped at Kodachrome Basin State Park. This is the first paid area on this list. I think it costs about $10 for the car to head in, and there's a lot of trail options inside of Kodachrome Basin. We really enjoyed hiking around the Angel's Palace Loop, and then we also hiked the Panorama Trail, which winds across the western side of the park and allows you to see some cool features, such as the Cool Cave Secret Passage and the Hat Shop. From Kodachrome Basin State Park, you have a lot of option on where to head off to explore, as you are right next to Grand Staircase-Escalante National Monument. On our trip, we decided to head towards Skutumpa Road. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it is a fun road, and go to hike the Willis Creek Slot Canyon. Now, you can drive a long way down that road. If you keep going, you can come out near Kanab, Utah, and get to kind of the southern aspect of Grand Staircase-Escalante. But we just wanted to hike one trail and then continue heading east. So we just hiked the Willis Creek Slot. And Willis Creek was fun. The road out has a lot of elevation change, and it's a dirt, less maintained road. So again, it was fine while we drove it, but just be aware that it's not one to drive in wet conditions, and it can be helpful to have a little bit higher clearance vehicle on it. But the trailhead for Willis Creek is right off the road, and you get to the Slot Canyon pretty easily. So it was a beautiful dog-friendly hike through some lovely Slot Canyon walls. And since we were headed further east, we backtracked down Skutumpa Road and headed towards Calf Creek Falls Recreation Area. Calf Creek Falls I had been to before, but it is one of my favorite hikes in this area, and there's a lovely campground at the base of it. We were able to get a nice campground spot here and headed off to hike Calf Creek Falls in the morning. Calf Creek Falls is about 6 miles round trip, And there is a parking fee if you're not camping there. We paid the camping fee instead, but just know that there is a fee for hiking here unless you're getting dropped off. As the name suggests, the hike follows Calf Creek through some very beautiful dramatic landscape and ends at a fantastic waterfall. There are so many colors there, and it is just gorgeous. The first time I hiked this trail was in the end of May, and it was so hot out. I was hiking in shorts and a tank top. It was super hot, and the dogs and I really enjoyed cooling off in the water. This time in early April was a whole different story, and I hiked this trail in a winter coat and hat, and Glia had a coat on for most of the hike, so very different experience, but just as beautiful. From the Calf Creek Falls Recreation Area, we wanted to do another hike in the area, and in this area, you're very close to the Hole in the Rock Road. Hole in the Rock Road has some fantastic hikes on it, but not all of them are dog friendly. So dogs are allowed on some of the trails down there, but that road contains famous hikes like Spooky and Peekaboo Canyon, and those are really narrow slot canyons. So we didn't go all the way down there. We stopped and hiked at Bighorn Canyon, which was a little bit of a slog through some sandy open terrain to get to the slot canyon. It's about a 2-mile walk out to the start of it from the trailhead that we chose, which is by these blue water containers. It's really easy to miss because it doesn't really look like a trailhead, but you'll see cars parked by blue water containers. Park there, 2-mile walk out through sloggy sand, but then gorgeous shallow slot canyons. It's just fantastic. We really enjoyed that hike once we got out there. After hiking in that area on my trip, I drove the rest of the way out to Moab and spent some time in that area as well. But if you're just staying in the southwestern portion, this is a great time to backtrack again towards Kodachrome Basin State Park and take Cottonwood Canyon Road to another few beautiful hikes. You can stop at Grosvenor Arch on your way if you head from the north here. And then a few miles south of that, you're going to come to the Cottonwood Narrows Trailhead. And because I have so many hikes on this list, I am going to split it up into 2 parts. So this is where I'm going to end part 1. And stay tuned next week for part 2. And in the meantime, if you have any favorite Utah spots that you would recommend, list them below. I would love to hear where your favorite places are so that on my next trip, I can see even more. Thanks for watching.